Welcome to Old South Moon. Here, under the moss draped trees and wide southern skies, we share ghost stories, folklore, and strange happenings from the hollers of Appalachia to the heart of the South. Pull up a chair, pour yourself some bourbon, and settle in because when the moon rises, the past has a way of speaking.
The Stranger. The summer of 1947. Now that was a hot one. Even in the deep hollers of eastern Kentucky, where the mountains should have offered some mercy from the heat, there was none to be found. Blair Branch was no exception. Sure, the swift creek that flowed the length of the branch gave some relief from that thick, choking humidity, but it was still oppressive. Downright miserable, you might say. Now, Dale Adams, 16 years old and green as spring grass, Dale was certainly feeling the heat that particular night. But it had precious little to do with the weather. You see, this boy had just had his first real brush with the law. Him and his best friend had spent most of that summer running moonshine for a local bootlegger. Simple door-to-door deliveries, they called them. Nothing fancy. But their actions, well, they'd been noticed by the local authorities. Dale's friend had been arrested earlier that very day during their evening run. And Dale knew it was only a matter of time before that sheriff came looking for him, too. So no, the heat was the last thing on Dale's mind as he made that long, lonesome trek up the branch toward home that night. Blair Branch is what folks call a notoriously deep holler. It snakes its way for miles back into those ancient mountains. Dale's family, they'd been among the very first to settle in that area, way back when it was still known by its original name, Devil's Branch. Their homestead sat almost at the very head of the holler. Now, Dale typically loathed that long hike up the rutted-out dirt road, those gnarled locust and maple trees looming over the embankment like twisted sentinels, casting shadows that seemed to reach for you in the dark. But on this night, Dale was oblivious to those shadows. His mind was in a state of pure conflict. How would he escape this mess? Where could he go? How in God's name would he tell his parents? Halfway home, and Dale still didn't have any answers. Not a one. The ambient glow from neighboring houses along the creek grew dimmer as he made his way up the branch. The further he went, the fewer the neighbors, until eventually the only light came from the stars above and the thin sliver of silver moon. Twisted roots seemed to strain in his direction from the embankment. The thick Appalachian canopy draped at graveled road in a dappled pattern of moonlight. It was as if the very forest and the night itself had conspired to compound Dale's growing hopelessness. The toe of his worn brogan caught a protruding rock, and Dale tumbled hard to one knee. His fingers dug deep into that sandy soil. Every emotion that had been brewing during the course of his journey, it all suddenly boiled over, and Dale began to weep. Now at 16, Dale was practically a man by mountain standards. The shame that comes with crying, well, that only added to his melancholy. Shame that would have been absolutely intolerable had he been anything other than completely alone. Except he was not alone. A hand gripped his shoulder, firm but gentle. A warm voice whispered through the darkness, "Are you hurt, son? Are you all right?" Dale rolled over and kicked himself clear across that road, crab-walking on his backside until he reached the very edge of the creek. Above him stood a stranger. His outline was barely visible in the moonlight, his face hidden beneath the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. The stranger beckoned with an outstretched hand. "Let me help you up, son. I didn't mean to scare you." His senses absolutely splintered from the day's events, Dale accepted the stranger's hand without a second thought. Once he was back on his feet, Dale dusted himself off and absently dug at a sharp bit of gravel that had lodged itself in his palm. The stranger stood silently in those shadows. "Are you all right?" "I'll live. I appreciate it, sir." For the first time, Dale was looking dead on at this stranger, and a wave of pure uncertainty washed over him. Before him stood a man, just barely taller than himself, but he was cloaked, not only in shadow, but also in what appeared to be an actual cloak. And atop his head, casting his features in complete darkness, was some sort of wide-brimmed hat. Curious attire for such a warm night. "Dale, well, I gotta get home. Thanks again." Dale turned toward the head of the holler, but then, in a hushed tone, just above a whisper, "Do you mind if I walk with you? We're going in the same direction." That's fine by me." 1,000 alarms were ringing in Dale's brain. Who was this man? Where was he going? How long had he been following? Once again, the stranger spoke, jarring Dale from his racing thoughts. "What's your name, son, if you don't mind me asking?" Dale was hesitant, but his mountain manners got the better of him. Dale Adams." And just as those words left his lips, Dale was gripped with absolute terror. What if this man was looking for him? What if he was some sort of detective or deputy? The ominous pause that followed was simply, and then silence.
After a few more steps, the stranger spoke again, almost as if he had forgotten to finish an earlier thought. "Home is the only place I want right now. If I can just make it back home, I think everything will be all right." The response was a shock to Dale, but somehow a comforting one. In his boy's heart, Dale wanted nothing else to be true. If he could just make it home to his bed, to his family, everything would be all right. But in his young man's heart, he knew the truth, feared the truth, feared it more than he did his strange companion. This time, it was Dale who broke the silence. I'm actually kind of lost right now. I mean, I know how to get home, but I'm lost about everything else. I've got problems that I don't know how to fix." The stranger's voice called from those shadows almost immediately. "That's a heavy burden for a young man, but I've got a notion you'll find a way. Sometimes it's better to sleep on these things and see what the morning brings." Another long silence followed, and then the stranger continued, but his tone had shifted from warm to worried. "To be honest, I'm lost too. I know where I want to go. I'm just not sure how to get there." Dale didn't know how to respond. He didn't know this man, didn't know where he might actually be going. His mind searched desperately for words, something that at least sounded like support. And then, suddenly, the road forked. The night had moved faster than Dale realized. These unlikely companions had come to the very last fork in the branch. The right fork led to Dale's farmhouse. The left fork led deeper into the mountainside. Between the forks was a wide turnabout, and the gap in the forest canopy allowed the moon to fully illuminate that gravel road. Dale turned, just in time to find the stranger turning away and starting up the left fork of the holler. "I think I've found the right trail. There's nothing up there. That goes nowhere except straight into the mountain." The stranger turned back toward Dale, and for the first time, the moonlight spilled across his face. For the second time that night, Dale was terrified. The moonlight illuminated nothing but blank flesh beneath the brim of that stranger's hat. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. And yet, the stranger spoke to Dale one final time, that warm whisper coming from the night itself. "Everything will be all right, Dale." With that, the stranger turned and walked into the shadows.
Dale was too horrified to respond, too horrified to even move. He backpedaled down the fork toward the farm, then turned and ran as fast as his legs could carry him. Dale didn't even want to acknowledge the events of that day, let alone the stranger. He crept into the house as quietly as possible, not even bothering to get undressed before slipping into his bed. He knew his father would have questions come morning, but right then, Dale just wanted to crawl as deep into his blanket as humanly possible. And eventually, he slept. The following morning, Dale sat down with his parents and explained the events of the previous day, with one notable exception. He never mentioned the stranger. Although they weren't happy with his plan, they agreed not to interfere. Later that very day, Dale visited the recruiter's office in Whitesburg. Despite lying about his age, he found himself enlisted in the Army. America was just 3 years past World War II, and Dale gambled on the notion that they'd take anybody willing to join. The sheriff eventually did come to the Adams farm asking for Dale, but found that the boy had already bussed out to Fort Knox the week before. Some years later, during the Vietnam conflict, Dale would find himself lost once again. His helicopter had been shot down, and Dale was the sole survivor. After salvaging his pistol, a poncho, and a wide-brimmed boonie hat from the wreckage, he set out blindly into that hostile jungle. He evaded enemy soldiers for days, and eventually wandered into a U.S. patrol. When asked how he managed to survive for so many days alone, he simply replied, "I just kept talking to myself, telling myself that if I could just make it home, everything would be all right. I wanted to make it home, and I just had to find the right trail."
Thanks for listening Under the Old South Moon. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next ghostly tale. Until then, keep your lanterns lit.